Hi everyone, and welcome to today's video where we will be trying to use data to predict the outcome of TTL5 T90's Platinum League, which starts this week. In order to do that today, I'm going to be using T90's website where he has a prediction table where you can actually go in yourself and make these predictions and see how the tables will look after you've inputted your predictions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the full tournament. On the website you can only do the group stage bracket, but I'm going to see how that works out, see who qualifies based on our predictions, and then pull that through to the end where we will have our winner, our first place, second place, and so on. So if you want to do this yourself, you can access this on T90official.tv. I'm going to put a link in the description so that you can do this. There's also something on there for submitting a fantasy team as well, which I've also done. I actually did this the other day. I already submitted some predictions, but I didn't do it based on the data. I just did it off the cuff and based on what I thought would happen. So with that being said, I'm going to say this one is my TFG TV data predictions. I don't know if there's a prize for winning this, but I don't want anyone to think I'm submitting twice. So we're going to go through the game by game, and I'm going to use head-to-head data, and where there isn't head-to-head data, I'm going to use map data, so which players are best on particular maps and map types to try and come to the conclusion of who might win a particular series. And the reason why I'm using map and map type data is because we have an interesting map pool, and we have a map pool which consists of a few water maps. There's also quite a lot of closed maps. There is less of what we would generally call semi-open maps, which are maps like Arabia, enclosed, other types of maps along those lines where you have a semi-wallable map, which tends to encourage meta play. But because we have so many maps in this map pool that are not going to encourage meta play, I think there are going to be some opportunities there for certain players to shine, and we'll get into that as we go through. So the first matchups I'm going to look at are the matchups from Group A. Group A from the outside looks like it's going to be pretty obvious who's going to qualify from my perspective. I think Leary's probably going to get through, Tato and MBL. Maybe Bars pips one of MBL or Tato to that qualification spot, and I think Rapard and Lix probably drop down to Gold League. But let's see how that plays out in our predictions. So we're going to start with Leary and Lix. So we don't actually have any head-to-head data from S-tier tournaments between Leary and Lix, but based purely on the disparity between those players, I think in quality, and that's no disrespect to Lix, I think Leary's just probably the second best player in the world at this point. I'm going to give a sweep to Leary for this one, and I don't think many people are going to be hugely disagreeing there. Lix might be able to pick up one game, but I really don't think Leary's going to lose any more than that, and I really think he's in a good position to get a sweep there. So that's relatively straightforward. I think for the next one, Tato v Bars. So I'm going to bring this up on screen as well, and I'm going to look at my data as I do this. So if I look at the Tato's record against Bars, it's pretty decent. Tato has 4 wins out of 5 on semi-open maps versus Bars. He's got 2 wins out of 2 on open maps. He's won the one hybrid map they've played and won the one nomadic map they've played. So Tato has a very good record here. What I will say is that I think Tato is not the player he was a couple of years ago. I think there was a point in time where Tato was probably maybe, top 4. But I don't necessarily think he's there now. And his tournament performances have been a little bit more inconsistent. And Bars is a very good player. So instead of going for a 3-0 here, I'm going to go for a 2-1. And I'll put that data up on screen as well so you can see what I'm looking at. But I think for that one, I'm going to give the 2-1 to Tato, but I think Bars will win a game there. MBL versus Rapard. I think, again, we don't have any data in S-tier tournaments for MBL versus Rapard. So I think, again, here, just based on the disparity of the players and also just based on Rapard's S-tier tournament performances. He hasn't had that many S-tier tournament games, and his performances haven't been very good. Again, that's no disrespect to Rapard. It's just what the stats say. I think MBL would probably be expecting a sweep here as well. So I'm pretty confident of that. Again, just because of the difference of the map pool, Rapard might have a chance, just because these maps are so different from the meta. But MBL is not a meta player by any means, and I believe that MBL kind of thrives in a chaotic environment, which I think these maps could create. So I think MBL is in a pretty good position there to get a sweep. Leary versus Rapard, I think, is exactly the same story. I really expect Leary to sweep this as well. Again, there might be an opportunity, there might be an upset, and make it a 2-1, but I really don't see Leary losing that set, and I don't see him losing a game in that set as well. So it gets more interesting with Tato and MBL. So when we look at Tato's record against MBL, on semi-open maps, Tato has 5 wins out of 7. On hybrid maps, he has 4 out of 6. On open maps, it's a bit more even, where both have 2 each. Chaotic maps, Tato has 2 wins out of 2. Closed maps, it's 50-50. Water maps, Tato has won the one game they've played, and nomadic maps, Tato has won that as well. So historically, Tato has a good record against MBL. MBL has been playing really well recently as well, as we saw in the Red Bull ladder qualifier 2. Based on the history between them, I think Tato probably wins this. It seems that MBL doesn't have the best record against Tato, and I think Tato is still one of the top 5 players of the last kind of 5 years or so, but definitely a top 10 player at the moment. So I'm probably going to say 2-1 Tato there, for that particular result based on the data. Bowls versus Licks is an interesting one. I think Bowls will win this set. We don't have a lot of data between Bowls and Licks. So if I go into my spreadsheet and see the head-to-heads between Bowls and Licks to see if there's nothing there. So S-tier tournament-wise, there's not really a lot to go on. And I only really want to look at S-tier tournaments here. I never want to kind of filter in A-tier tournaments when we look at these head-to-heads, just for a myriad of different reasons, but mainly because they're not taken as seriously as S-tier tournaments. With Bowls versus Licks, I think I'm going to go 2-1. I think Licks can cause problems, and I don't think there's enough of a disparity like with Leary, like with some of the other players in this group, that would mean Licks doesn't have any chance of picking up a game. And I think this would be a game where Licks is like, I've got to win a map, right? And so I think here, this is where Licks can do that. But I still think Bowls will end up winning that set. So Leary versus Bowls. This could be interesting. I think if I go to Leary versus Bowls, I'm not sure there's been a lot of games here. Yeah, there's not any S-tier tournament games between Leary and Bowls either, so that's going to be really interesting. But I think just in terms of player quality, I think Leary will probably win this 2-1. I don't think he'll sweep Bowls. I think Bowls will pick up a game, but I do think Leary will win that set. Tato versus Rapard. Again, we don't have a lot of history here, but and again, sorry to Rapard here, but I think that's going to be a sweep too. I just don't see a situation where Tato drops a game. Again, there's always upsets in these tournaments, there's always opportunity, but I think Tato will get that sweep. And this is why predictions are fun. It's so we can look back at these afterwards and you can say, what an idiot, when it turns out Rapard wins this 2-1 or sweeps Tato. MBL versus Licks, again, I've got as a 3-0. I think Licks is really good at, I think, sometimes causing players problems and causing meta player problems. MBL, again, thrives in chaos. And I think if a game does get chaotic, I think MBL is going to deal with that more than fine. So I, again, feel like that's going to be a sweep for MBL. Leary versus MBL, a little bit different here. So if we look at Leary v MBL, Leary has a pretty good record against MBL. He has a 72% win rate in the 18 semi-open map games they've played. So he's got 13 wins out of 18. Leary v MBL on hybrid maps is 50-50, but there's only been 2 games played there, so they both won 1 each. And on open maps, Leary has beaten MBL once in the 1 game they've played. Now, there's a lot of closed maps. I don't know how comfortable Leary is on closed maps. I don't feel like I've seen him in a lot of closed map situations. I'm actually just going to have a look here and see how Leary actually fares overall on closed maps. So on closed maps, Leary has a pretty average record, actually. It's actually his worst map type. So I'm going to bring this data on screen as well. Leary has played 44 games on closed maps and he's only won 21. This is where I think MBL might be able to cause some problems. So if I go to MBL's record on closed maps, again, there's 4 closed maps in the map pool of the 15. He also has a pretty bad record. I was not expecting that. So MBL has played 21 games on closed maps and has only won 8. So this could be very interesting. But again, I think when you do think about things like MBL's best map type, it's actually semi-open maps, which is funny because that's normally something that is for meta players, and meta players tend to do better on semi-open maps, and MBL is not a meta player. So I think this is quite interesting. I think because of the quality of Leary, I think he still wins this set, but I think MBL does win a game. And I think that's a conclusion maybe we could have come to without that kind of preamble, without looking at the data. But I think based on the data and based on this, Leary will still win the set, but he will probably lose a game within the set. I do think this could go either way. I do think MBL could possibly win this set as well. He has been playing well recently, but I don't think it's. I think the smart play here and the smart prediction is to just go for a Leary 2-1. That was a lot of words just to come to that conclusion. So, Tato v Lix. Again, I really feel bad for doing this, but I feel like that's a sweep again. Maybe 2-1. I think it might be smarter based on, Tato's recent performances and, based on Lix's ability to create some chaos. I think there might be a 2-1 there. We don't have a lot of history between them again. So if I go to my data, do we have any history between Tato and Lix in S tier tournaments? I'm not sure we do. Yeah, we don't. You know what? I'm going to go 2-1 for this. I don't know why. This is purely vibes based. This isn't based on data, which is the whole point of this video. But I do feel like without the data, there is going to be there might be a situation there where Tato could lose a game. Let's just have a quick look at Lix's map type performances. So Lix does best on nomadic maps and semi-open maps. Hasn't won any on closed, hasn't won any water, hasn't won any on hybrid maps and S-tier tournaments. Based on that, I think I'm going to go back to 3-0 for Tato. Just because we don't have a lot of semi-open maps. I think we maybe got 1 nomadic map, but the rest, the vast majority are going to be closed maps, and out of 4 games, Lix hasn't won any closed map games. So I feel like there is an opportunity there for a 3-0, and I'm going to stick with my original. I'm going to say 3-0. So after that, we have Biles versus Rapard. I think this is a game where Rapard is going to need to win a map, right? I think I've been pretty harsh on Rapard so far, but he has played, Leary, MBL, and Tato at this point. So I think I'm going to go 2-1. I still think Biles will win that set, but I think this is an opportunity for Rapard to win a map. Again, we don't have, as far as I'm aware, any head-to-head data for Biles versus Rapard. Let's just check. No, we don't have any head-to-head data for them. Again, Rapard's record on just in general on S-tier tournaments isn't great. If we look at Biles' record on different map types, he's pretty good. He's got good records on chaotic maps, closed maps, semi-open maps, nomadic maps, and water maps. So he's a pretty well-rounded player, Biles. So I think whatever situation he's going to be thrown into, he'll probably win. But I think Rapard's probably going to try and do as much as he can to win a map here. So I think this is a good opportunity for him to do so. Another juicy one, which is Leary Tato. So Leary Tato have obviously met many times in the past. What we can see is that Leary has a pretty good record on most map types. So Leary has 11 out of 20 wins on semi-open maps versus Tato. He's also got a better record on hybrid maps, a much better record on open maps as well. So on open maps, Tato's only won 1 out of the 6 games versus Leary. What is interesting here is that on closed maps, Tato is 3-0 against Leary, which could indicate, based on the map pool, Tato would probably, based on this data, be best. His best bet would be to pick closed maps, based on the history. So I think based on that, are we going to do a bold prediction here? I think we need a bold prediction. We've been pretty cautious so far. I'm going to say 2-1 Tato. Purely based on Tato's performances on closed maps versus Leary in the past. And if we look at Tato's record overall on closed maps, he wins 61% of his games. So he's won 40 out of 65 on closed maps. Whereas if we compare that to Leary, Leary has won just 21 out of 44. So he's only got a 47% win rate on closed maps. He's played less of them in S-tier tournaments. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say Tato will win that set. I might be wrong. And this would also give Tato 5-0 with only 3 games lost. Do I think that's going to happen? Maybe, maybe not. But let's see. That's going to be my bold prediction. I don't know how many more of those I'll have, but that's my bold one. So MBL versus Bars. So if we look at the data between MBL and Bars, I'm sure there must be some games between these guys, having appeared in so many tournaments. So if we go to MBL versus Bars, they only have 2 games. So MBL has won most of those. So he's won. He's won both of those. So MBL has they played once on a hybrid map, once on a semi-open map, and MBL has won both of those games. I think that Bars has a chance here, but I think MBL will win the set. So I think that's a 2-1 for MBL, and I don't think I'm going to be any more bold in that prediction. And then finally, we have Rapard versus Lix. Again, we don't have any data between these two. So based on what I know just about the pro scene, I would probably rate Lix a little bit higher than Rapard. I might be wrong in that, and someone can correct me in the comments. I'm sure they will. They always do. If they think Rapard has a better chance here, but I'm going to go 2-1 Lix. So my final standings for Group A are Tato at the top, Leary in second, based on that one bold prediction. Obviously, if Leary wins that, he would go top. But I think it will probably come down to that Tato Leary game, based on what I've predicted so far. And then MBL, that would mean MBL and Leary go through to the qualifiers. I think Bars will stay in TTL, and I think Lix and Rapard go down to gold. I don't think there's any crazy surprises there. I think if most people were doing these predictions, they would probably swap Leary and Tato. And again, that's just going to be based on that one game. If you flip that around and go 2-1, Leary then goes top. But I think based on the map pool, Tato does have a good chance there. So on to Group B now, and we have a very, very interesting group. And this is the group of death, I believe, in this tournament. So we've got Hera, Hart, Yo, Vinchester. Good luck picking which of those 4 players, go through. And then we've got Siscan and Lucho, who again, very experienced players. Lucho, a younger player, but also very up and coming, and could cause a lot of problems in this group. So my predictions for this one, Hera, Lucho, there isn't really any S-tier tournament data here. I think Lucho is a very good player. I think he's a very young player, but I think he's very new to the S-tier tournament scene. And I don't necessarily think he's had the experience of playing different types of maps, different types of strategies at this level. And I think Hera is just going to sweep. Hera has swept much better players than Lucho in these tournaments. I think that's probably going to happen again in this one. I don't see Lucho taking a game here, but I could be wrong. But I think that's a sweep. Hart v Vinchester is a cool one. This is going, obviously they had that great battle for the Red Bull ladder. If you haven't seen that, I would recommend you go and watch it. But in S-tier tournaments, They've only ever played on semi-open maps, which is interesting. And Vinchester has won 3 of those 5 games. I think based on the map pool, and if we look at the players like map type stats, if we look at Vinchester's stats, he has a pretty good record on nomadic maps, semi-open maps, chaotic maps, and closed maps, and water maps as well. He's a 50-50 there. The only map types he really struggles on historically are hybrid maps and open maps. And when we look at Hearts data, he is very strong on open maps. Other map types, as we can see, he tends to struggle a bit more with, particularly closed maps, where he only has 5 wins out of 15, which for a player of Hearts quality is very, very low, and it's actually his worst map type. And again, considering the number of closed maps we have in this map pool, I don't think this is a tournament that is necessarily going to suit Hart. And I think Vinchester will get a 2-1 here. I don't think he'll sweep Hart, but I think Vinchester will get a 2-1 based on the data. But we can see. Yo versus Siskan. I don't know if we have any head-to-head between Yo and Siskan, but let's take a quick look. So yeah, we don't have Yo versus Siskan. Yo is such a good player. And I think if we look, and I'm always looking out for the closed maps here, just because there's so many in the map pool, and also water maps as well is something to keep an eye on. But when I look at Yo's record, he does very well on semi-open maps, open maps, nomadic maps, hybrid maps. Doesn't do so well on chaotic water and closed maps. This could potentially mean that there is an opportunity here for Siskan. Siskan has only ever really played semi-open maps in his S-tier tournament career. And obviously he's a lot less experienced than Yo. I think, based on that, Yo probably does sweep, but I'm going to say 2-1. I'm going to say 2-1 based purely on the number of water maps and closed maps, which, again, based on the data, which surprised me. I thought Yo would do a lot better on those types of maps. But they are his weaker maps. So I think there, 2-1 probably isn't out of the question. Which would be tough for Yo, I think, in such a difficult group. But I think Siskan does have an opportunity there. When it comes to Hera Siskan, I think that is a sweep. Again, I think there's always an opportunity. There's always a chance for an upset. Maybe Hera's casting career gets in the way of his practice. But he said in the Town Centre pod he actually thinks it's helping him. But I think in this particular situation, I still think Hera will sweep Siskan here. I think he's the best player in the world. So Yo versus Hart. If we go to that head-to-head, Yo has a very good record against Hart. He's got 6 out of 7 wins on hybrid maps, 2 out of 3 wins on semi-open, 2 out of 2 on nomadic, but hasn't beaten Hart on open or water maps, but they've only had 1 game each on those. I think Yo probably still has enough here to beat Hart, but I think it's going to be close. I think it could go either way, based on how Hart is playing at the moment. But again, I think Yo probably still has the edge in this matchup, I think. So I'm going to go 2-1 Yo. Vinchester Lucho. This is a matchup where I think Lucho could win a game. This is purely going on vibes. I don't have any data for Vinchester v Lucho. I think Vinchester's a very solid player. I think he probably could sweep Lucho. But I think Lucho is going to cause people some problems. I don't think he's necessarily going to cause Hera problems, but I think he's going to cause everyone else some problems. And I think he's probably going to take him out there. Hera v Vinchester. I love this matchup. And I love this matchup because Vinchester is one of the few players that has a pretty respectable record against Hera over the course of the last 5 years. Vinchester has 7 out of 15 wins on semi-open maps for Hera, 4 out of 9 on hybrid, 1 out of 4 on open. Hasn't beaten him on chaotic maps. But again, it's normally pretty 50-50 historically between Vinchester and Hera. That being said, Hera's the best player in the world. I think that's a 2-1. I don't see a world, and this is This might come back to bite me. I don't see a world where Hera sweeps Vinchester. I think Vinchester's too good. I think he takes a win there. But let's see. But yeah, I really think that's going to be a fantastic set. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Heart v Siscan. Again, we don't have much data between the two. But I think based on the history, and I think based on these maps, not necessarily based on the data, being favorites of Heart, I'm going to go ahead and say that's 2-1. I think just based on quality, Heart will win. But I think Siscan maybe picks on some of those weaknesses there. Yo v Lucho, very interesting. I think in this particular situation, I can see a world where Yo 3-0s Lucho. I can also see a world where Lucho takes a game off Yo. But again, this is purely going to be based on information we don't really know about Lucho. Can he play these types of maps in S-tier tournaments and win? We don't have that data. We don't have that information. He might come in and absolutely kill it. So I think logically, it's probably a 3-0, but there's something about Lucho that makes me just think he's going to take games off everyone but Hera. So we'll see. Hera. Now, this might be a bold prediction. I'm going to say Hera sweeps Yo. And the reason I think Hera sweeps Yo is because of Hera's record against Yo on closed maps. Since the release of DE in S-tier tournaments, Yo has not beaten Hera on a closed map. That sounds crazy. That sounds like a crazy stat that shouldn't exist, but it's real. So, I think in a situation where there's that many closed maps, there's also a couple of water maps. Yo has only won 3 out of 7, which is not bad, actually. It's about 50-50, more or less, on water maps. And based on that, and based on the fact that there's hybrid maps, but Hera, again, has won the vast majority of games on hybrid maps. The only map type where Yo has a positive win record versus Hera is on nomadic maps. And famously, Hera is weaker on nomadic maps. There isn't many nomadic maps in this pool. I think there's one. I might be wrong about that. Let me get up that data just so I'm not misleading you all. Yeah, there's one nomadic map. There are 3 open maps, 2 chaotic, 2 water, 4 closed, 2 semi-open. So there's actually a really good distribution of different map types, but the vast majority is closed. Do I change this to 2-1? No. I'm going to leave it bold. I'm going to say Hera sweeps Yo. Who knows? Also, these predictions make me look like a Hera fanboy. I'm really not. Reacted to my video and got me a ton of subs, but I'm really not. I actually prefer watching the Viper. Sorry, Hera. I'm just old. I'm going to edit that out. I'm not going to say that. So, I might leave it in. Who knows? Might be funny. Hera will probably appreciate it. So, Heart v Lucho. I think this is, again, another situation where where Lucho takes a game off a player. Again, we don't have a lot of historical data here, but again, based on the maps, based on Lucho and his reputation, I think there is an opportunity there for Lucho to take a game. Vinchester Siscan is interesting. I'm going to say that's a sweep for Vinchester. There's nothing about Siscan's data that makes me think he would take a game off Vinchester. Based on Vinchester's general record and based on how I rate Vinchester as a player based on his data. But that could very easily be 2-1 Vinchester. I don't see a world where Siscan wins that set, but I think Vinchester has a good chance to sweep. And I think in this group, with how competitive it is, these are the games for Vinchester, for Yo, for Heart, for Hera, where they're like, I kind of need to sweep this. I need to win all my games, because otherwise things can get very tricky. Hera versus Heart is also another interesting one. Hera, 7 wins out of 7 versus Heart on semi-open maps and S-tier tournaments. 5 out of 5 on hybrid maps. Hera even has the win over Heart on a nomadic map. The only map type where Heart has actually... Oh, wait, no. Heart has beaten Hera on a nomadic map. I got that wrong way around. You can see it on the data table. So the only map types where Heart has ever beaten Hera is on nomadic maps and open maps. Every other map type he's lost, and doesn't have a win in an S tier tournament against Hera. That being said, I think Hart is probably a different player than he has been over the last few years. I think he is definitely up there now with one of the best players. I am tempted to give the Frio. I'm tempted to give a sweep. Something in my head tells me that Hart's going to win a map. And I know this is based on the data, and I should be using the data. And you know what? Fuck it, I will use the data. We'll say Frio. But do I see a world where Hera just loses one game this entire series in the play or free? Where he's maybe bringing back strategies? No, I'm going to just 2-1. Still think he sweeps Yo. But I think that game, probably 2-1. Yo v Vinchester. Now that data is interesting. It's very competitive on water. Two wins each out of 4 games. So they are pretty even. Open maps, Yo, 2 wins out of 2. Closed maps, Yo, 1 win out of 1. I think based on the history, based on the map pool, based on the current situation, I'm going to go Vinchester. I think Vinchester probably wins that 2-1. I might be wrong. I think that could go either way. This is a really hard one, actually. But I'm going to go Vinchester. Just based on what I've seen in the data. It feels like, at the moment, Vinchester's maybe slightly ahead of Yo. Siskan v Lucho. I think Lucho gets a win there in the series. I don't have any data to back this up. So again, as much as I want to do these data predictions, I think some are just going to purely go on vibes. And I want to make a couple of bold predictions, but I don't think it's bold to say Lucho beats Siskan there. And I don't think it's bold to say it'll be a 2-1. I don't think that'll be a sweep. Might be a sweep. So this is how my final table looks. I think Hera goes through top. I think Hart stays in platinum. Lucho and Siskan go back down to gold. And then Vinchester and Yo in the playoffs. I don't think that's far off of what's going to happen. I think Hart, you could, any one of these 3, I think, can swap. I think Hera goes through top, as you would expect. But between Vinchester, Yo, and Hart, I think they could take up any of these 2 to 4 positions. But that's how I see it landing. So let's see what it does in the tournament bracket after. So let's move on to Group C now. And Group C is a really interesting group. I think this could go many, many different ways. Based on a number of different reasons. You've got Nikov, who did very, very well in TTL4 last year, got to the semi-final. Sebastian, who is arguably starting to come for the top 5 with his performances. ACCM, who is probably favorite for this group. Freakin' Andy, who does particularly well on water maps, and we'll get into that. Lewis, who is new in S-tier tournaments, but his rise has been rapid and kind of meteoric. And I think he probably has a good chance here. And Running, who is probably one of the best closed map players. And that's even comparing him to other, S-tier players. So let's see how we work this out. So let's have a look at the games. So we've got Nikov Running. Do we have a lot of history with Nikov Running? I don't think we do, but let's have a look. We do have some. Running has a pretty good record. They've only had 3 games, but Nikov has only won 1 of them, and that was on a semi-open map. The other 2 on nomadic and closed maps. Now, I'm really glad Running's the first player here because I want to show you some of his data. Running, when it comes to S-tier tournaments, there's an 85% win record, so 6 out of 7 wins in S-tier tournaments on closed maps. All of his other data, as you can see, is around 20-ish, 25%, and he's won 1 out of 2 nomadic games. Based on the fact that there are 4 closed maps in this map pool, and I know I keep saying it, there are also, I will say, a few water maps where Running doesn't do so well. If we compare this to Nikov's data, Nikov is not as good on closed maps, 11 out of 28, and water maps he's not perfect either, 4 out of 11. So I think, based on that, and where Nikov is better is on chaotic maps, nomadic maps, semi-open maps. So I think, based on this data, I think we might see Running win. That's it. Because I think if he gets Nikov on 2 closed maps, I think he wins them both, based on his data. Obviously, if that doesn't happen, I think Nikov probably is the better player overall, and I think Nikov probably wins that series. But purely based on the maps in the map pool and what's available for running here, I think running can win that set. That's what I'm gonna land on. Again, you can't use data for everything, and this might turn out to be terrible, but we'll see. So Sebastian versus Freaking Andy. So let's take a look at their record. How often have they played each other? They haven't played each other in an S-tier tournament. Interesting. Let's look at their stats then, just generally on different map types. So if we look at Sebastian struggles more on water maps, which is interesting. And I'll tell you why it's interesting. So Sebastian only has 4 out of 11 wins on water maps. And then if we look at Freaking Andy's data, has a very good record on water maps. He's got 8 out of 12 wins in S-tier tournaments. So I think based on that, and based on the fact there are a couple of water maps in this map pool, I think Freaking Andy wins a game. Because I think he can pick one of those as a home map and do quite well. Where he's going to struggle is closed maps, where he's got a really bad record, 2 out of 11. Whereas Sebastian, I think, is much more well-rounded in terms of the maps that he is solid on. So Sebastian's really good on closed maps as well. 7 out of 12 wins. So this is a really interesting matchup because what happens in this series, I think, is going to be purely based on the maps that are selected. If Freaking Andy gets 2 out of 3 water maps, for example, then I think Freaking Andy wins the series. I think if Sebastian gets more closed maps or any other map type, then I think he'll win. But I think either way, I think Freaking Andy can pick a comfort map as a home map. But I think Sebastian's quality wins that. So I think that's going to be a 2-1. I don't see us getting many sweeps in this group, to be honest. I think there's going to be a lot of 2-1s. I think this is going to be my worst group for predictions, just because I think so many things can flip based on a game. And obviously when you're in a playoff 3 and the matchups are this close, that's where we're going to see some potential upsets. ACCM Lewis, again, I don't have much data from Lewis in S-tier tournaments. He just hasn't been in that many. I think ACCM's experience with different maps and with different strategies, I could see this being a sweep based on that. But I think Lewis is good enough to win a game here against ACCM. Like, I don't see that necessarily being I think that might be a sweep, but I think I believe in Lewis's quality. It's not just because I'm English that I'm supporting the English guy, but I think Lewis can win a game. Nikov v Lewis, I think this is going to be a similar story. I feel like Lewis's momentum will push him to a 2-1 here. I think Lewis beats Nikov. I think historically, Nikov probably wins that based on experience in S-tier tournaments. I think this could easily go either way. I think it could be a 2-1 Nikov. I think it could be a 2-1 Lewis. Do I want to stick with that? I think I do. I think Lewis's performances, I think how he performed in Red Bull, on the Red Bull ladder. Yeah. I think let's, based on watching him play, he's a really, really good player. I think let's go 2-1. Sebastian ACCM. That's going to be a great game. That's going to be a great series. Sorry. I really like both of these players. We don't have any data in S-tier tournaments. That's probably why I'm so excited for it, because I haven't seen it before. I think it's going to be really interesting. Where does Sebastian struggle more? Water maps? Open maps, maybe? But everything else, hybrid, semi-open, closed maps, I think he does pretty well. Let's take a look at ACCM. See, ACCM struggles more on water maps, on closed maps, on chaotic maps. His best is nomadic. We've only got one nomadic map. I think we go 2-1 Sebastian here. I know, I've heard people say ACCM's favourite for this group. I think Sebastian's favourite from this group, based on the data. But let's see. But I'm going to say 2-1 Sebastian. Freaking Andy running is going to be very interesting. Running is not good on water maps in S-tier tournaments. Freaking Andy is not good on closed maps. We have 4 closed maps. We have 2 water maps. We have some hybrid maps in there. but I think freaking Andy's the better player. This could go either way again. I think it could be 2-1 either way. I'm gonna go freaking Andy. Why does that not feel right? Why does it feel like running's gonna get? I'm gonna put the data up on screen. You can see where I'm struggling here. But if we go back to freaking Andy's data, do we have any head-to-heads between these two? I don't think we do. All we've got is how they each individually perform on different maps and different map types. So I think if I look at running and look at his record on water, that's not very good, but then his record on close is really good. And that's what I'm struggling with here. I think it really could go either way. I think freaking Andy's probably the better overall player. So I'm going to say 2-1. Nikov freaking Andy. So freaking Andy has beaten Nikov on hybrid, nomadic, and water maps, and they've only had one game each. But freaking Andy does well on those. Semi-open maps, Nikov's won 3 out of 3. But there's not a lot of semi-open maps in this pool, as we've seen. There is only 2 semi-open maps. There's only 2 water maps, I guess. I suppose I'm just thinking that because semi-open maps normally dominate. I'm going to go 2-1 Nikov. I think based on his performances last year in TTL, he does quite well. Nikov had a good year last year, I think. Maybe the year before I'm thinking of. But Nikov's been solid. I'm going to say 2-1 Nikov. And this is getting very... You can see how the group's shaping up. It's very, very, very close. Sebastian Lewis. We don't have a ton of data again on Lewis, but I think Sebastian's a better player. I think Sebastian wins 2-1. But I think Lewis probably can win a map there. I really don't feel like any of these are going to be sweeps. I think if there is a sweep, it's good. This is where the group just turns into a sweep fest and every game is 3-0. In the complete opposite direction the way I predicted it. But, you know, when we don't have a lot of data to go on, you know, we're going to be at risk. Okay, ACCM and running. Let's see if there's anything interesting here. We do have some games. Probably not a lot. Let's see what we do have. So, ACCM and running have played 3 times in S-tier tournaments in the last 5 years. Running has won 1 of those. Guess which map type? It was a closed map. ACCM won the other 2 on a hybrid and a semi-open map. I really feel like running is going to pick up based on his history and based on his data. I think he's going to win maps. I think he really is going to win maps, but I don't think he's going to win sets. I think that's 2-1. I don't think that's a sweep for ACCM. I think running is so good on closed maps, and there's so many closed maps in the pool. You're not going to ban all of them. You can't ban all of the closed maps. So I think running's always going to have a chance, and I think he's going to... I can't see him getting swept based on that. So I'm going to say 2-1 ACCM, which is really interesting because I don't see running winning a lot of series, but I do see him winning maps, which is... You can see what that's doing to this table. So let's go Nikov ACCM. So ACCM, pretty interesting record. So ACCM has 2 wins out of 3 against Nikov on closed maps. They've played 1 hybrid map, which ACCM won. But ACCM has only won once against Nikov on semi-open maps, which is interesting. That wasn't a data point I was expecting. Still think ACCM wins, but again, I think it's a 2-1. I don't see sweeps. I just don't see a lot of sweeps here in this group. I think it's gonna be very, 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 very close. Let's say ACCM, just because I think he is the favorite there. Sebastian running again. I feel like running is always going to be able to get a map on this map pool. Let's have a look, see if there's any head-to-head data that might change my mind here. Nope, no head-to-head data. Again, we know Sebastian is pretty good on closed maps as well. So it's not to say that Sebastian is bad on closed maps. He's quite good. So I think if running was going to get swept, this would be the series where he gets swept. Would be by Sebastian, I think, based on that data, because Sebastian is pretty solid on closed maps. But I'm still going to say 2-1. But I think Sebastian does win that. Yeah, I think Sebastian's favorite for in this group. I just think he's a really, really good player. And I think he does win. I think that's a deciding set, I think, between Sebastian and ACM. Look at running. Look how high up running is so far. But we've still got a few more predictions to go. Freaking Andy Lewis. I think, again, based on the map pool, based on the fact that I think Freaking Andy's going to get one strong map, and I personally haven't seen Lewis in a lot of different situations in S-tier tournaments, right? We've only really seen a Red Bull ladder, King of the Desert. Everything else has been kind of A tiers. And freaking Andy does have more S-tier tournament experience. That being said, if I think Lewis beats Nikov, do I also think Lewis beats freaking Andy? And I think he might. I might come to regret that, but I think Lewis might win that as well. And again, this isn't UK bias. It might be a little bit of UK bias, but there's something about Lewis's momentum at the moment that I think is really powerful, and I think he probably wins that. Nikov, Sebastian. So they've not played many. 2 hybrid map games, a nomadic map game, a semi-open map game, and Sebastian's won a majority of them. Nikov's only won one of those, and that was on a hybrid map. Again, I think Sebastian's just so good. I think realistically, Sebastian loses one of these sets, right? Probably maybe to ACCM. But I just can't pick which one. And I think if I'm just going based on what I think and based on the data, I think Sebastian probably beats Nikov. I'd say Sebastian edges that match. And that's all I can go on at the moment. So I'm going to say Sebastian, based on the history, based on the data. ACCM and freaking Andy could also be very, very interesting. We don't have any head-to-head data. So again, we go back to the map types. What are our weaknesses and our strengths? Again, ACCM just doesn't have a great record on closed water maps. And he does play a lot of top players as well, just because he plays so many games, because he's always there. So, a lot of those losses would come to the likes of Hera, the Viper, Yo, top players. Whereas freaking Andy does have particularly good, like we say, on water maps, but everything else he struggles on a lot more. It's good on hybrid. He's decent on hybrid maps, but nomadic, open, semi-open, chaotic, closed. Yeah, I feel that's a 2-1 for ACCM. I think freaking Andy again can pick a comfortable home map where he gets a win, but I think ACCM still wins that series. And then Lewis versus Running. This is where I'm gonna kill the UK bias rumors. I'm gonna say Running wins that. Running gets into the playoffs based on this. That I just feel like how am I sitting here saying Lewis beats freaking Andy, Lewis wins map off Sebastian and ACCM and beats Nikov, and then loses to Running to knock him out of the playoffs? Is that real? Is that a real thing I'm doing? I just feel that Running got so many opportunities with those closed maps to do really well. I know it's bold, but I'm going to say Running qualifies in the playoffs. I just think that he's always going to have something. He's always going to have a comfortable map. Do I think he's good enough to beat Lewis in that situation? When it comes down to it, when the pressure's on, does Running win that, or does Lewis win that? See, if it goes the other way, look at how close this is. Based on this, if Lewis wins that, Running finishes bottom and Lewis qualifies for the playoffs. If it's the other way around, Running qualifies and Lewis stays in platinum. Yeah, interesting. Let's be bold. We were bold before. We can be bold again. So let's do it. Let's say Running qualifies for the playoffs. And I'm again basing this purely on Running's ability on closed maps. That is what I'm doing this on. I think if there were 2 closed maps in a map pool, or even 1, I think Running doesn't get through. But I think there are so many opportunities here for Running to show his prowess on closed maps that I think he finds a way to at least stay in platinum this year. I think if I'm Running and I saw that map pool, I'd be rubbing my hands together being like, I've got a chance here. I've got a really good chance here. I might be completely wrong. He might get swept every series, but I'm going with it. This is fun because when I'm inevitably wrong, people can clip this up and we can look back at this and we can say, what an idiot. And data doesn't mean anything. Data's bullshit. But let's see. And now we get on to Group D. Group D is going to be difficult for me to predict with data because there are a lot of players in here that haven't played a lot of head-to-heads. And I don't have a ton of data on. But we'll see what we can do. But this is going to be much more vibes-based than the other groups. So let's start off with Dark versus Mihai. I think in terms of head-to-heads, I don't know if we have much data between these two, but let's check. We don't. So let's just have a look at each player's history on these maps. So if we go to Dark first. So Dark is okay on closed maps. He's really good on open maps. So 6 out of 10 wins on open maps. 12 out of 35 on semi-open. So semi-open not strong for him. Decent on hybrid and decent on nomadic. If we have a look and compare that to Mihai's history, not strong at all. Really good on water, Mihai. I didn't realize that. 3 out of 3 wins on water. 3 out of 6 on hybrid. 2 out of 6 on nomadic. Has only won 2 of 10 semi-open map games. So if you're going to beat Mihai, particularly in Dark's perspective, you want to get him on a semi-open map. 1 out of 3 on closed. 0 out of the 1 he's played on chaotic maps. I think based on Dark's performance, and Dark has had a really strong year. He had a really good 2025. He was one of the best players in 2025, I think. I think he was in the top 5 players for 2025 in S-tier tournaments based on how well he performed in TTL4. I think I'm going to give a 2-1 for Dark versus Mihai there. I think Mihai probably can find a comfort pick and a home map that he'll do well on. But I think Dark probably wins that. Sito and Dragonstar. See if we have any data for those two. We don't. So let's have a look at how they perform on different map types. So for Dragonstar, or Dr. Agonstar, as some people like to call him, not a particularly strong record on any map types. 2 out of 6 wins on closed, 6 out of 14 on semi-open, 1 out of 7 on open, which is particularly bad. 4 out of 9 nomadic, which is okay, and 3 out of 11 on hybrid. I think if we're looking at just the players here, Sito is the better player, but it's always worth looking at this data to compare. Sito's really well-rounded, actually. Looking at his map data, 10 out of 18 wins on closed maps, 7 out of 12 on water, 3 out of 7 on chaotic, which is probably his weakest, 14 out of 30 on hybrid, 8 out of 18 on nomadic, 9 out of 19 on open. Pretty good record. I'm going to give Sito a sweep. I just think based on that record and based on that data and based on how good Sito can be one of the best players in the world, I think. He is definitely up there. He's a really, really solid player. When I say one of the best players in the world, I don't mean like top 5, I mean like top 10. But when I look at Dragonstar's data, nothing particularly stands out, and I think Sito's so good. I think Sito can get a sweep there. The Viper and Vivi. Viper's had a lot on this plate lately. The Red Bull thing was really, really difficult, I think. But the Viper's got a 100% record against Vivi, historically. They've only played 7 games, but Viper's won all 7. That's a sweep for me. I think even on a bad day, Viper maybe loses 1 map there, but he doesn't lose any more than that, I don't think, against Vivi. I think the Viper wins that, and I think Viper as well, after his performance in King of the Desert, after the disappointment of the Red Bull ladder, I think with the Game of Legion stuff and that now thankfully being resolved, I really hope we see a fire from Viper in this tournament. I really, really hope we see that. And I think, this group is an opportunity for him to say, I'm still the Viper. Like, I am still going to crush the majority of players. I think that's a 3-0 based on everything, based on the data, based on vibes. I think that's a 3-0. Dark versus Vivi. We don't have much data here for those two, so we know Dark's data. Let's have a look at Vivi's data. So Vivi does pretty well on nomadic maps. He's got 4 out of 6 wins. Semi-open is his next best, where he's got 26 out of 66, so it's pretty good going. Really bad on hybrid maps. Only 1 win out of 13 on hybrid maps and 1 win out of 7 on closed. And no wins on water. Based on that, I think Dark could sweep Vivi. Really think he can. I've got 3 sweeps in a row here. This is not going to go well. Because map wins are so important. And players know that. And players are not going to want to get swept. But I just, based on that data, it doesn't look good for Vivi. And Dark had such a good year. People might think I'm nuts here. But I think that could be a 3-0. Maybe I'm getting tired. I'm getting down to groups. I'm starting to lose my mind a bit. But I'm going to say that's a sweep. Sito versus the Viper. Interesting. I found it very, very funny when in King of the Desert 6, where I think he had a post-win interview with Mem, and Mem was saying, oh, you've got the Viper next, it's going to be difficult. And Sito was like, yeah, but a Viper's not a Viper of old. I think I've got a chance. And then he loses 4-1. Thought that was quite funny, personally. So, this is the head-to-head data between the two. Sito has a win against the Viper on open maps. He's won 1 of the 2 games they've played on closed maps. Viper's won 5 out of 7 times against Sito. I think that's a 2-1. I don't necessarily think Viper sweeps Sito there, but I think the Viper does win that based on the history, based on the current situation of the players. I think the Viper wins that too. Cool. Dragonstar Mihai. So let's just remind ourselves of the map type data. So yeah, Dragonstar's not particularly impressive in his history. It does okay on semi-open, nomadic, and can't really say closed maps there. Mihai much better. I think Mihai, we said, does really well on water maps. That could be his kind of crutch here. Does okay on hybrid. I think that's a 2-1 Mihai. Based on the data, based on what I've seen. I think we go 2-1 Mihai there. I'm happy with that. Dark v Dragonstar. Again, I don't think we have any head-to-heads here, but let's take a look. Maybe, did they meet last year in TTL? No, they didn't. If I think Dark sweeps Vivi, do I think Dark sweeps Dragonstar as well? Dark's not going to sweep everyone. He had a really good tournament. He beat the Viper, Tato. He beat loads of great players last year. I think there was another one in there who he beat, who was like a top 5 player, but I can't remember who it was. Dark v Dragonstar. Can I see Dragonstar winning any of those maps against Dark is the question. Maybe a nomadic, maybe a semi-open. We compare that to Dark's data. Is he any worse on those map types? No. Maybe semi-open actually. We'll say that's a 2-1, I think. I think we give Dark the 2-1 there over Dragonstar. That feels comfortable as a pick, as a prediction. Cool. So let's look at Sito and Vivi. No head-to-head data with Sito and Vivi. Let's look at Sito's general map data, which is again pretty good. We've already seen he's quite a well-rounded player. Does pretty well on closed maps, water maps, which there are a lot of. I think Vivi is mainly... I think we've said Vivi mainly doesn't do very well on closed and water maps. Yeah. Really not a great record. His best in nomadic and semi-open. I don't want to keep sweeping Vivi. Swept him twice. Vivi's going to need to win maps. If he gets swept here... I think this kind of comes down to when the games are played as well, I think. I'm going to say 2-1. Because if these are in order... I'm not sure if they're in order of when the games are played, but if these are in order... I think Vivi's probably going to be like, I need to win something. I need to win a map here. Maybe that's the opportunity to do it. It will either be... I don't think he'll get swept in both these. I think he'll take a map off of Dark or Sito. But let's just say for argument's sake it's Sito. The Viper versus Mihai. I see this as being the Vipers. Let's just check that head-to-head, see if I'm wrong. Yeah, Mihai's won 1 nomadic map against the Viper. The rest hybrid, semi-open, closed maps. I haven't played many games. The Viper's so good, like historically, if we look at his data. Yeah, there's not many maps that he's particularly bad on. Chaotic maps, he's not as good. But over the last 5 years, like, he's just still so strong on everything. And when I compare that to Mihai's data, even on water maps, like, he's got 26 out of 39 wins, which is pretty good, which I think was Mihai's strongest. And if Mihai's strongest map type, yeah, water maps. Do I give the Viper another sweep? Yeah, I think I do. I think this is maybe the group where we see the most sweeps. Maybe. That's a prediction. I think Group D is probably going to be where we see the most sweeps. Again, I could be crazy wrong. Dark versus the Viper. What I love about this is that we have a rematch from last year where Dark defeated the Viper. So if we have a look at the Viper's record versus Dark, Dark is winning because they played the 3 games in that series last year in the group stage, and Dark won 2-1. Do I think we'll see a repeat of that this year? No. I think the Viper is going to want to repair that, but I do think Dark wins 1 map, so I think the Viper does win that. I don't think he's going to allow that to happen again. think he was maybe taken by surprise from Dark last time. I don't think he's going to allow that to happen. I think he's going to be, that competitive spirit is there, and I think he's going to look at that and say, I don't want that happening again. So for me, that's a 2-1, but I don't think he sweeps Dark. So Sito Mihai, let's take a look at if we've got any data between these guys. We do have some data with Sito Mihai. They played a few games, all on different maps. They've played 5 games across nomadic, semi-open, chaotic, closed, and water maps. Sito has won 4 out of 5, except on water, which is interesting because obviously we know Mihai, based on the data, has a good record on water, 3 out of 3. Sito's not bad on water, I don't think. Let me just bring up the data again, but I don't think Sito's data is particularly bad on water. 7 out of 12. It's actually quite good. But the fact that Mihai's beaten him before on water, I think we're going to say 2-1 to Sito. I think Sito wins that set, but I think Mihai wins the map. Dragonstar and Vivi. This one I really don't know about. I don't even know if we've got data. We do not. No history there. But again, Vivi's record on some popular maps in this is not great. No wins on water. His only real strong point is nomadic. Hybrid maps really poor. Closed maps really poor. If we compare that to Dragonstar, it's better, 2 wins out of 6 on closed, 6 out of 14 on semi-open. Is Vivi better than Dragonstar? I don't know. I think probably. I don't know. I can only go on the data. No, that wasn't meant to be a sweep. I think Dragonstar wins. I'm going to say 2-1. But that could go either way. I think Vivi could win that as well. Let's say 2-1 Dragonstar. We're going based on data. Why not? Dark v Sito has the potential to be very interesting. Let's see if we've got much data between these guys. We don't. But as we've said, Sito's very well-rounded. Does well with a lot of the maps in this map pool. I think looking at the data, I think we go Sito win here. But I think we go a 2-1 win. I don't think that's a sweep. So I think Sito wins that. And then the Viper v Dragonstar. It's going to be hard for me not to call this a sweep. But let's see on if we've got much data between them. We don't. Yeah, the Viper's so good, man. Like, I just don't see many situations where, again, Viper can have a bad day if he's if he's playing at night, or if he's, there's other stuff going on. Can Dragonstar win a map there? Can he win the set? Yeah, probably. I'm still going to say that's a sweep for Viper. I think this is a good group for Viper, just in terms of his qualities versus the qualities of his opponents. I think he's just better, I'd be really sad if he doesn't win this group. I think looking at that, I think it's going to be tough. Like, there's going to be some tough games in there, but I think series-wise, the Viper should be winning those. I'm going to say Frio. I'm giving him another sweep there. And then Vivi Mihai. Does this have consequences? I think this could have consequences of who stays in Platinum. So we should take this seriously. Don't have any data between them. I'm going to say 2-1 Mihai. This is really harsh on Vivi. I've given Vivi like 3 map wins and no set wins. But it's just based on the data. Like, I can't look past how bad Vivi is on water and closed maps. And based on that, you're talking about almost half of the map pool. And then hybrid maps as well, which is another one. You're talking about half the map pool where Vivi just hasn't got a great record. So if players draft this right and lean into their strengths, then I feel like Vivi's going to struggle. And I think that's it. That's where I'm landing. So the Viper wins the group. Sito Dark qualify. Mihai stays in Platinum, and then Dragonstar and Vivi drop. That's what I'm thinking. So let's move on. Okay, so now this is how the bracket looks based on our predictions. So we have a round of 12 that includes Vinchester versus Running, Sito versus MBL, Leary versus Dark, and ACCM versus Yo, with Tato, Sebastian, Hera, and the Viper getting through automatically to the quarterfinals. Now, I'm basing this based on the placements of last year's TTL and what happened there. So this was, the second place from a particular group playing third place from a particular group. So I just mirrored that. I don't know if it will be different this year, but I'm assuming it's going to be the same. So that's what I've done and replicated to get to these groups. So I'm not going to do score predictions here just because they're best of 5s, best of 7s. I'm just going to say who I think is going to go through at this point. Vinchester Running. Look at how manual this is, by the way. Look at how much of a beast I am. I think Vinchester wins that. I think over the course of 5 games and over the course of 5 maps, I think in a play all free situation, running can have some good opportunities, but I think faced up against a player like Winchester with, you know, maybe less closed maps that he's able to play, I think Winchester comes through with that win. Yeah, I don't think we need to look at a ton of data to say I think Winchester wins that. So Toe MBL, I think could still be interesting. So let's just have a look at that data. MBL's won 6 out of their 9 semi-open map games. So Toe's beaten MBL in water, but other than that, MBL's done quite well. I think based on the history here, based on quality of the player, I think it's going to be close, like a 3-2 or something, but I think MBL wins that. Let's drag MBL over here. So he'll play Sebastian, Pato will play Winchester, based on my predictions. These are some great games. I'm producing some really great games based on my predictions, at least. Leary Dark, again, I think Leary wins. Like, I don't really necessarily have to look at a ton of data. I don't think there's a ton of data between Leary and Dark, but I just feel Leary's better there. And I feel like in a group stage, it's important based on, you know, how many map wins, how would that affect the group. When it comes down to a best of 5 elimination, I think it more depends on who is the better player overall. And I think there's such a disparity there between Leary and Dark, just in terms of quality of player, similar to Winchester running, that I think Leary gets through that. ACCM Yo is very interesting. I think Yo generally has quite a good record against ACCM. Yeah, he does. ACCM's pretty good against Yo on closed and open maps. So ACCM's won 2 closed maps against Yo and 1 open map. Water, they're kind of 50-50. Yo is won 6 out of 8 on hybrid maps and 11 out of 15 on semi-open. So I think based on that head-to-head data, again, with ACCM, he always pulls it like to the last game. Probably be like a 3-2 or something, but I think just generally that's a win for Yo there. So I think we get a quarterfinal, a really juicy quarterfinal actually. Tato Winchester, Sebastian MBL, Hera Leary, the Viper Yo. That's really nice that. So now it gets really interesting here. So how do we look in a best of 5 between Tato and Winchester? Tato and Winchester already met on 1 water map in an S2 tournament, and Tato won that. They're 50-50 on semi-open, 50-50 on closed, and Tato has the slight edge on hybrid, 3 out of 5. I think the data, although it slightly skews to Tato, I think right now Winchester is the better player. Based on what happened last year and based on his performances, I think Winchester wins this. I think he takes the series. Again, I think it's going to be very, very close, but I think Winchester wins that. Sebastian MBL will be very, very interesting as well. That'll be a really, really good game. They've not met in an S tier tournament, have they not? So I think Sebastian's really good. I think Sebastian has a good chance of winning a tournament this year. I think. They'll struggle on water maps. They'll struggle more on nomadic and open maps, but he's really good on semi-open, hybrid, and closed maps, which we know there's a lot of. MBL does struggle on closed maps. 8 out of 21 wins. I think we talked about this. Struggles on water maps. Again, I think it will be close, but I think based on the data and based on the positioning of these players, I think Sebastian probably goes through there. Hera Leary, we know this. They've played so many times, and Hera obviously has the edge. I don't think it's worth going into the data too much here. Like, we can maybe look at how they do on particular map types, but I think Hera dominates on all map types against Leary. In every single map type, Hera dominates Leary. Hybrid maps, semi-open maps, open maps, water maps, closed maps, nomadic maps, chaotic maps. It's close. It's not like this is, these are all super far apart. But Hera wins that series, I think. I don't think Leary wins that series. I think Hera goes through there. The Viper and Yo, their history will be interesting. So Yo has a slightly better record against the Viper in head-to-heads on semi-open maps. The Viper's slightly ahead of Yo and hybrid maps. The Viper and Yo are 50-50 on open maps. The Viper slightly ahead on nomadic, slightly ahead on water, slightly ahead on closed. This is a hard one because we could get 2 Vipers. And I think Yo over the past couple of years has probably been better than the Viper. All in. But in their head-to-heads, the Viper does seem to have a very, very slight edge. And it really depends on the Viper that we get, but I think the Viper goes through. That could be either, honestly. I think it's so close that it could be Yo or the Viper there. Winchester Sebastian in the semi-final and Hera the Viper. This is a really juicy bracket. This is really interesting. I think there are a couple of games in here where you think Leary Dark, Winchester running. I think, 9 times out of 10 there's only going to be one winner there. But from the quarterfinals onwards, this is really tough to call. And this could be anything. But I think I'm using data here to try and find where people are going to end up. Winchester Sebastian. What does the data say about Winchester Sebastian? So Winchester's won 2 closed map games out of 2 against Sebastian. Sebastian's won 2 hybrid map games out of 2 against Winchester. They're 50-50 on nomadic. Winchester has won both games on water that they've played. Winchester has won the open map that they've played. Sebastian's won a semi-open and Winchester's won a chaotic. This is super hard to call. Really, really, really hard to call. It could be either. It really could be either at this point. I just think Winchester, and I don't know why, and I'm going purely on vibes. I would love to see Sebastian reach the final. I really would. Sebastian in that final, probably against Hera. Really, really hard to call. There's something about Winchester, man. There is something about Winchester. And I don't know why, but I feel like I'm going to go with Winchester over Sebastian. Just slightly. Very, very slightly. But that, again, I think based on this bracket, that could be either one. I'm not going to go into this too much. I think Hera beats the Viper. It would be great to see Viper beat Hera in a best of 7, in a semi-final, in an S-tier tournament, and go on to the final. But I just think that Hera is just too dominant at the moment. I hope we will see someone different win an S-tier tournament this year. I really do. That's going to be really hard for the Viper, I think. And I think, we can show the data. I can show the data between Hera and the Viper, but it's not the best reading. Semi-open maps, Hera slightly edges it. Hybrid maps, Hera edges it by a few games. Open maps, Hera edges it. Closed maps, the Viper still has 7 out of 10 over Hera. So Viper, if you are watching this, maybe get Hera on a closed map. And obviously nomadic as well, as we know. So the Viper wants to get Hera on a closed map and a nomadic map. I think based on the map selections and the map bans, the Viper can win that. That's my thought. But if the Viper's like, I want to play semi-open maps, I prefer this map type, and doesn't force Hera into maps that he's uncomfortable in, Hera wins. But I think if the Viper is strategic with his map selection, but then he might not feel comfortable on those closed maps and nomadic maps, even though based on the data, and based on how I'm looking at this, you want to force Hera onto closed and nomadic maps based on the history between them. But do I see Viper doing that? I don't know. So I think Hera goes through. But I think if the Viper is really strategic there, he can cause Hera some problems based on the map pool, which is really interesting. So that will give us a third place match between Sebastian and a Viper, and a final between Winchester and Hera. Third place matches, do the players really care? I don't think they're that interesting third place matches, but I guess they're a good preamble to the final. But I just don't think players care about them that much. But let's have a look. Let's see between Sebastian and the Viper. The Viper dominates on semi-open. The Viper dominates on hybrid. Viper dominates on water maps. But then Sebastian beat the Viper in that Red Bull qualifier. They've had some very, very close games. I think either way it's going to be close. I'm probably going to say Sebastian wins that. I think if Viper's in the third place playoff, he might be a different type of Viper. I don't think he'll be as interested. I think if Viper's in the final, that's a very different Viper. But I think if it comes down to third place, I think maybe Sebastian maybe wants that slightly more. But based on the history, I think the Viper wins. But I think based on the situation, I think Sebastian probably win it. Winchester v Hera is very, very interesting. Because Winchester is one of the few players who has a half-decent record. Winchester has 7 out of 15 wins on semi-open maps versus Hera. He has 4 out of 9 wins on hybrid map. Only 1 out of 4 on open, and 0 out of 2 on chaotic. But everything else, closed, water, nomadic, is 50-50. I'm still going to say, obviously, that Hera wins. But I think of all of the players in this tournament, I think Winchester, I think when it comes down to here, if that bracket follows the way I think it's going to go, I think there are two very, very big opportunities for Hera to lose. Because I think if the Viper can push Hera onto maps he doesn't necessarily want to play on based on the data, I think the Viper can steal a series there. I say steal. The Viper's still hell of a player. Like, he would still be well worthy of it. It's not like a huge underdog thing, but based on the recent history, it would be an underdog win. And then I think if Hera beats the Viper and gets through to the final, I think he's still got a really tough series against Winchester. Obviously, predicting Hera to lose a tournament is a really, really bold thing. And I don't think it's the right time to do it, not in TTL. But I think if the draw and if the series and if the tournament plays out like this, I think there are two massive opportunities for Hera to be knocked out and for Hera to not win. But I think overall, Hera has shown that he tends to come through and win these tournaments. So those are my predictions. This is what I think is going to happen. I might be completely wrong. We might see nothing close to this. But based on the data, based on the history, based on the information I have, this is how I see these games go. Tell me what you think in the comments. If you've made it this far at all. If you have, then please like, comment, subscribe. Tell me who you think will win this tournament. Tell me if you think my predictions are stupid for any reason. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the tournament, and I hope we'll see some really cool games. Thanks for watching.